Psalm 19, verse 6. His going forth is from the end of the heaven, and his circuit unto the ends of it. And there is nothing hid from the heat thereof. May God bless the reading of his word. Welcome to New Year's Cosmology class number 12, the spinning universe. Now, we've been kind of building up to this sequence as you start to see these ideas unfold, starting from the hypothesis in class 7. And then moving all the way up, we hit a real momentous occasion when we start talking about and showing demonstrable proof of the ether in class number 10. And then we hit another aha moment when we took the energy of the universe and started to understand its electrical nature and how that's 10 to the 36th power greater than gravity. And so now we have developed this universe to show it for what it really is, what we really see. And that is a spinning universe around a still earth. Now, I want to hit some of these major concepts today. I have talked about geocentricity in the past, and I will link that up. But basically, just some simple experimental proofs. One is what they did with the Milky Way, and we'll touch this a little later. Imagine these are like galaxies, and what they found is that they're all rotating. I think this is counterclockwise, but basically starting at the point of the center point of the Milky Way, going up its north pole, basically the Milky Way's north pole, they found that all the galaxies are in rotation around our galaxy, the Milky Way. But they're all doing counterclockwise, going across this equinox. And guess what's here? The Earth. None of them go counterclockwise below. Okay? And remember, if I got it wrong, then it's clockwise. I mean, you can figure that out. Okay. But yeah, basically, we do see this turning, this spinning of the universe in any frame of reference. At all, we know that the universe is spinning. And then there is an experiment which has, a lot of geocentrists put this with class number 10, but I decided to take it out. It was called Airy's failure. Airy's failure was an experiment in the 1700s. And what was going on was they were going to prove the spin of the Earth by experimentation. It was in order to do that because when you see there's a rotation, we have the Earth and the stars. How do we know that the Earth is moving and the stars are standing still versus the stars are moving and the Earth is standing still? And so, as we look at this telescope, because there is a spin, telescopes are always tilted. Okay, because we know there's a spin. But if we fill the telescope up with water, then it slows down, the water slows down the light. Since it's slowing down the light, it would be as if the Earth stopped spinning. So we assume that putting the water in there, slowing down the light, is going to make it appear as if the Earth's spin, it's going to counteract the Earth's spin. Okay? Because the Earth's movement would stop, therefore there shouldn't be any problem. I could have got that wrong. This is one of those experiments I'm not really great at explaining. But basically, by slowing it down, there should be a greater tilt. Instead, there was not a tilt. In other words, it didn't negate it. And since it didn't negate it, then the problem wasn't the Earth moving, the problem was the stars moving. Okay? And so basically they just called it Airy's failure because they assumed, by presupposition, as we're all taught from the time that we're about 5 or 6 years old, they assumed that the Earth is moving. Now, this is one of those funny things about physics and reality, because what we look at is we say, of course, the Earth is spinning. That is a fact because I was taught it since I was a little kid. But reality doesn't respond that way. Now, I will be going over this in the next class, okay, a lot deeper. But basically, why is it that if I'm moving at 35 miles per second, that I'm not being tossed or smashed? And it gets even worse when you start talking about this. But Why is it that all these things are explained away in a spinning universe? It is an effect they call the Coriolis effect. I should have wrote that out. Coriolis effect. So basically, when we have this spin, okay, when the Earth is spinning, something interesting happens. By calculation, it should be about 42 miles per second across the equator. But at the North Pole, it should be, at the geographic North Pole, it should be about 2 miles per second. Which is not very fast, which is just kind of noticeable. And yet, there is no difference. The Eskimos don't feel any different than the people at the equator, except for the fact that the Eskimos are a lot chillier. But I don't know. I mean, they eat a lot of whale blubber. They're happy they got the igloos. I don't know. But basically, you have that Coriolis effect. Now, in the geocentric world, the Earth is not moving. So you don't have to put the Coriolis effect upon it. But they will tell you, hold on, the universe is spinning extremely fast. Why isn't the universe feeling the effect? Same effect, same physics, the Coriolis effect. Once you switch the Earth to be solid and unmoving, then the universe will take on the effect of physics of Coriolis forces. Now, by the way, these same Coriolis forces, all of a sudden, everything becomes unified. For instance, when we see a tornado, that tornado is based upon this spin. And of course, they would say that it must be the spinning Earth. You switch to geocentricity, and then that Coriolis effect is from the rest of the universe. That's the major difference, is that we start to notice not only what the sun does, but what all the universe does in all of these effects. Now, what we want to do is we want to kind of take a little time to switch over and start looking at some different scientists, peer-reviewed, and some different illustrations. Okay, so we're going to go over here. All right, first, we notice this. That's Bertrand Russell. He's an atheist. And he says that the merit of the Copernican hypothesis is not truth, but simplicity in view of relativity of motion. No question of truth is involved. So in other words, we're talking about a relative issue. Okay? Even the leftist atheist admitted it. Okay? And we also see here in, I think it's a philosophy of science textbook, talk about the ideas of absolute space. Now what we're going to do is you, the viewer, need to sometimes pause, okay? Pause on these pictures. So I'll talk a little bit about them, I'll explain them to you, but actually we want to really get a focus in on. Now this is the Sloan scale. Now, what you'll notice, this at the center, I believe it's the Earth. Sometimes I do the Milky Way, sometimes I do the Earth. But when I found this, it said it was the Earth in the center. And what you'll notice, this is a map of the universe. This is supposed to be three-dimensional, okay? So it's really like an inner tube, okay? Unfortunately, just because of the nature of the machine, you started to get more and more emptiness that you couldn't actually see with these machines. And this is according to Redshift. But basically, what you might notice is these little lines here. Every little dot is a galaxy. And as you see these lines and you go up, you see the lines again. These are all galactic shells, shells of galaxies. And so when they started to map this out, then they started to look at it as if it were fully formed. This is what they presume. Fully formed universe would look like this. And you see, like an onion, it has these layers. Now, what's so special about that? Basically, everything in the universe is curved around where the Earth is. Okay? Everything is pointing in a direction. Now, The fundamental philosophical principle in physics, or I should say in cosmology, is called the Copernican principle. That there is no center to the universe. There is no direction. Space is space. Why? Because there is inherently in their philosophy no God. Because if there was a point, if there was a direction, if there was something special, then something would have to make it special. Something would have to provide that. The laws of science are supposed to be things that are only in our mind. They're not supposed to be out there. So when we go back to it, everything's pointing towards that center. And basically, now here's the argument though, okay? As far as the Copernican principle, it's undone right there, okay? But what people may say is the Earth the absolute center of the universe? Well, from those measurements, they're saying it's more like the center of the Milky Way galaxy. But that doesn't really affect things as much as we would like to think it does. Because actually what we're dealing with is we're dealing with something that's in a spin. Now, one thing about a spin is that a lot of times the spin moves. Whenever you're watching a tornado, the tornado is not always in sometimes they'll drop down in a column, but mostly it swivels around. When we talk about the spin that's supposed to be the spin of the Earth around the sun, it goes in elliptic, okay? It doesn't go in a perfect circle. So if it's going in elliptic, then basically, if I point it, then everything in the spin will still go around it, even though it's not in that perfect circle. So that's what's going on there. Then we look at the Planck scale. Now this was a measurement of, now the darker is supposed to be like blue, which is cold, and red, which is hot, okay? But basically this is a map of the cosmic microwave background radiation. And basically, as they started to map out the universe, they started to notice an axis. They started to notice this pattern that goes back and forth. Now, this is two-dimensional. If you made it three-dimensional, it would turn into a globe, and this would look like an equator, okay? And so basically, when you start to notice a pattern, you say, hold on, there's a pattern. What's making the pattern? Why does it operate according to a pattern? Knowledge is not supposed to be out there in the universe. It's supposed to be in our heads, and maybe the aliens' head if you could ever find them. Never found them. But now we start to notice, okay, here we got this stuff going on. What does it mean? Let's look over here. Now we've got several things going on. Now, as I talked about on the chalkboard, you see this north ecliptic pole and the south ecliptic pole. Okay, that's what we were talking about, that all these galaxies are revolving around. And then you cut through over here, and basically this line is the full big line. Okay, they just drew that line, but the full big line. And then you have this spring equinox. Well, guess what? The Earth is right here with all these galaxies revolving exactly the same way around it, and it's got this band of cosmic microwave background radiation going all the way across it. So it's going across this way, and it's going across that way, and X is actually marking the spot. There is, now think about this, the whole universe has a band going right through the Earth one way, and then a direction going another way, and up and down. All right. In order to get those two things together, one of the a philosopher who's really doing research on this, Robertson Genesee, put it like this: it's like finding a pea. It's like putting an X on a pea, like a little pea that you eat, in the Milky Way galaxy. Okay? How on earth, if the Earth is not different, and remember the Earth is supposed to be going around the sun, right? But yet it's the Earth where this is lining up. It's the Earth that's lined up with that axis in the ecliptic. Alright, now this is talking about a principle called Machs Principle. Okay? And we'll look a little, there's another paper or two to talk about it. But basically, this is written by two, I believe they were mathematicians, Barber and Bertotti. And there's another paper written by a guy named Luca Popov. And basically, now this is a different paper. But these are peer-reviewed papers. Okay? Barber and Bertotti and the Popov, they wrote peer-reviewed papers on this to show Machs Principle. And what Mach basically did is he came up with this idea that everything in the universe is interrelated. So instead of thinking about our solar system as here's the sun and that's it, and then we have this little sun thing going on, and the universe is just, oh, who cares? No, all these stars have gravity just like the sun does. All right? So what about the star's gravity? Doesn't the star's gravity affect our solar system? And so what would happen, and we'll talk about this in the next class, is that if the universe is spinning, then all these stars are spinning and their gravity is spinning around the solar system, and they're all carrying the sun, and the sun is carrying the planets with it. Okay? Now remember one thing though, the last class we had a new element that's not even being brought up, that these guys are not even using the element that I brought up, which is electromagnetic energy. Okay? That's going to really give a lot of power to the universe. All right? So when it's got this spin, the whole thing is locked tight and it's made a perfect Coriolis effect. But mathematically, it is fine according to Mach's principle. Now, this is just a little bit of a blast from the past, and this is talking about the Michelson-Morley experiment. And this fella Miller here, I remember getting his name wrong, and then I got it. I think it's Dayton Miller. Dayton Miller here. This shows the fact that they really did find an effect, basically evidence of the ether drag. Okay? Now, in this paper over here, they go over another issue that I've talked about, and that is the fact that we don't have any experimental evidence of dark matter. And so these guys went and did some math, and it's another peer-reviewed paper. Okay? And in this other peer-reviewed paper, they found that the Earth would be near or at the center of the universe. And now we go over here. Here is the famous physicist Ernst Mach. And he's basically giving us, and remember, you can just take a pause on these things. He's just basically giving us the principle and how it works. And showing that both mathematically, because the geometry is the same, both could be true. Now, let's see here. Now, if you look at me holding this cross, the center of the cross, you would say, is right there. And yet the cross is balanced. Why is that balanced? In physics, we call it the center of mass. In other words, the geometry is not necessarily important for the center of mass. Just like if the Earth is in the center of a spinning universe, it doesn't have to be in the geometric center of the universe. Even though, as we've seen, it is sure awful dadgum close. Now, here's Isaac Newton also admitting this in a note. It's not in his principles, but it is a note that was found that didn't end up in his big book. And he's basically kind of admitting that, well, you just read it yourself. But the ideas that go along here, the modern mind was just not ready to understand the ideas of geocentricity anymore. They had assumed that if the Earth was the center, that somehow it's pushing things, and Obviously, that can't be if the universe is so big. But what if the Earth is not going against the tide? It's just in a favored position. Well, if it was in a favored position, then the idea of God is no longer a matter of faith, it's a matter of fact. And that is what's scary. That is what's controversial. And a lot of these scientists really couldn't wrap their minds around that. And so here you see them dealing with the Michelson-Morley experiment. Remember to go back and look at class number 10. And basically having to deal with these details. Make sure your shadow doesn't get in the way there. Are they getting the bottom good? Are they able to read that? Good. And here he goes. The struggle, in this next page, the struggle so violent in the early days of science between the views of Ptolemy and Copernicus would then be quite meaningless. Either coordinate system could be used. By the way, NASA does use an Earth-centered inertial framework, which means geocentricity. Okay, and we'll look at that now. This next quote is interesting too, because Einstein admits that in his first special relativity theory, in special relativity, he had, by force, had to get rid of the ether. But here he is admitting to the public, not much of the public, out in Germany and stuff, but he's admitting that basically he was extreme and that ether had to exist. Now this last paper I think has to do with Popov. I could be wrong, but I will bring any corrections to our next class. Alright, and so at this point, you talk about a shifting worldview. We have a shifting universe view. And if you go through the classes, the first class where I assert my right to the worldview, my second class where I destroy philosophical materialism, the third class dealing with the nature of general revelation and how you can't just throw God into the mix, that atheism has to stand on its own, and it doesn't. The fourth class, where we bust the Big Bang Theory, 23 different refutations, 23 obvious facts that show the Big Bang can't work. Then we start to talk about how biblical cosmology does support a spherical Earth. We show all the propositions of the cosmology using the revelation. Then we move on into the hypothesis. And then we show the limitations of the scientific tools. And then we show the limitations of the universe. And then we go and we show the proof of the ether, the substance of space. We show the magnetic power that's churning space. And now we show the favored direction. It is a scary thing to know that it's no longer a question of blind faith. It is a question of fact and humility. See you at next class.